I left San Francisco like 10 days ago, so you're my last stop, and it's pretty cool. This is what I like to do before talks is to walk around to the audience and like get a feel for what you want me to cover. So here's what I've got. Somewhere in the audience is the best ice hockey player ever produced by the country of New Zealand. So he was asking me about ice hockey scholarships. I don't think there's many ice hockey players here, so that's like me. I don't know, but still we've got that covered. Several students asked about what they said, and I'll phrase the question, is what we've heard about parties true? So I am not going to comment on college parties. There were questions about dress codes on American campuses. Let's see, what else have we got here? This was a great question. I have poor marks. Will Stanford care? So it's like, okay. A good warm-up, a great chance to get to know the audience, that's for sure. So briefly, I've worked at a few universities. Probably the most famous of the group is Stanford, but currently I work with the University of Chicago, which is one of those Midwest super academic schools, that's for sure. And I'll kind of walk you through the read process. I feel like the best way to address questions is to actually, for me to literally walk you through how we broke down an application in the United States, pausing along the way for questions after each section, that's for sure. Vocabulary terms you might want to know. The first vocabulary term would be just the term common application. And common application is, as the term suggests, the application commonly used by almost all private universities in the United States. Public universities, which often have the name of the state in it, University of California, University of Texas, they often have their own application because those are taxpayer-funded schools. But most of you, when you're talking to me about colleges, you're probably applying through what's called the common application. So we'll kind of keep that in mind and sort of jump in from there. Alrighty. So the first thing, I guess, kind of why study overseas. Now, I'm not an expert on New Zealand's higher ed system, so I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, here's what's bad about your system. Rather, I'll try and bring up some things that maybe might attract students to studying in the United States. The first thing that you've got is at many of these top 20, top 30, if you look at kind of a top 40 global universities, more often than not, it's dominated by American institutions. So I think that the quality of the education at some, not all, but at some of these schools is kind of unquestioned. And so you've got that going on for sure. At some of the schools, you've got kind of small, accessible class sizes. Even when I worked at Stanford, it was not uncommon for a class to have only 14 or 15 students in it. So you've got accessibility there, that's for sure. By attending or studying in the United States, you're kind of becoming now part of a robust alumni network that could lead to jobs in a particular area, sort of go from there. Oftentimes, state-of-the-art facilities are there. And of course, if you're kind of segueing into that workforce in whether it be New York or Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, you're looking at some pretty good salary options, So I think that those are all some of the things that you've got. The other thing that kind of, the overriding theme that I've picked up on this trip is also the concept of freedom, in the sense that the American undergraduate experience really empowers the students, more often than not, to kind of explore a little bit. We're not turning to you and saying, and what do you want to study? And tell us right now, and that's what you do for the rest of your life. Here in the United States, I think we like to put off maturation until 40 or 50 years. So it's sort of like, take your time, explore for a couple of years, then you can declare your major. There's a degree of freedom at the undergraduate level that I think other institutions in different countries maybe can't match. So that's one thing that I would say. Working at Stanford, and I'll use Stanford as an illustrator here when I talk about kind of unique things at a university. And I'm definitely not here just to talk about Stanford, but because I worked there, I had greater insight into things. So one of the things that we did at Stanford was we developed an introductory seminar program for first and second year people, or freshmen and sophomores. The idea behind these seminars is, again, you get to explore to figure out what it is that you want to study or do with your life. So there's that time given and courses specifically designed for that, if you needed that. There were overseas study programs. Stanford had campuses in different parts of the world, which was really great for all of the students. And then finally, and this one always jumped out to me, and I'll swing back to this, but when I was working at Stanford, what struck me was how much money they put aside to fund ideas, be they business or scientific, at the undergraduate level. In fact, when I worked at Stanford, $6.5 million was put aside to fund student business ideas, right? Now, I tie this in to, I tie this into a student that I worked with back in California that was driving me crazy on his applications, moving really slow, nothing was going on. I'm like, my God, come on, Andrew, your application's due. And he's always like, Mr. Walsh, I'm running late because I'm working on my business idea. I'm like, oh God, every kid in Silicon Valley's got a business idea, right? So one day, finally, I'm like, Andy, the application's due in 3 weeks. Like, what is this business idea you're working on? So he's like, well, I'm gonna take my phone and connect it with these stores and with these restaurants in the area, and I'm gonna develop this app and blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking, I'm like, Andy, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. Would you please just get focused on your applications? Well, what do I know? Because that idea became DoorDash. And Andy got into Stanford and took advantage of that $6.5 million fund to kind of take advantage of and start his business. And I think that's really kind of when you think about American universities, whether it be Stanford or NYU, whether it be Northwestern or Vanderbilt, you've got that sort of thing going on where they're trying to encourage innovation with the students. And I think that's maybe different than some of the other schools out there. You'll hear a bit about liberal arts curriculums in the United States. Again, that concept of freedom, that chance to explore. At Stanford, we did not require a student to declare their major until after their sophomore year. So again, that freedom that might be a little bit different than what you're used to. Most students are going to graduate from college in 4 years at the most. Many will finish in 3 to 3.5 years. And then, after that, in terms of student-staff ratio, I think that can vary with colleges. Not all of them are going to have small ratios. And in terms of global rankings, I think you're going to find that if you look at the top 10 universities in the world, more often than not, universities in the US are going to kind of dominate that. So at the very least for the students here tonight, I would say it's worth exploring or looking at and sort of seeing what happens or seeing how that might be different. Here's an example of a student that I believe went to this school, did some research, that was admitted to Stanford as a math computer science major, graduated and kind of taking advantage of an internship with the Warehouse Group, co-founder Notebook Labs, kind of how getting into Stanford then got him into that ecosystem that is Silicon Valley. My wife's journey is very similar. Graduated from college, entry-level position with some company called Nest. Nest gets bought by Google. Pretty soon she's working at Google. Then she makes friends with a bunch of engineers, and she's with another startup called Mill now. And she was an art history major. I still don't get it. So it's sort of like getting in that ecosystem can really pay off, that's for sure. Here's another student, again, the Y Combinator stuff that they were doing out of Stanford with the computer science to Uber. Then I think a couple of co-founders and startups here, building an AI co-pilot for merchandising. So there's something to be said, in my opinion at least, of where you study puts you into kind of a social and economic ecosystem that really kind of dictates maybe that first decade of your career as you get going. All right, now to step back. I started off my career actually as a teacher. I did not jump right into administration and work in admissions side. So I always joke that by the end of the next 30 or 40 minutes, you'll have had more training in admissions than I ever had when I started at Stanford. What I'm going to do is kind of walk you through each step of the way of the evaluation process. There's 3 hurdles that you have to survive if you're going to be a competitive applicant to a selective university in the United States. There's 3 hurdles. If you survive these 3 hurdles, I'm not saying you're definitely going to get admitted, but I'm saying you're close to admission. You're looking good. And we'll start with this, the first hurdle, which is kind of a common sense hurdle. And that common sense hurdle is grades. Just the first thing I'm going to do when an application kind of lands in my queue is I'm just going to go right to the numeric piece of the puzzle and be like, is this student qualified? Now, about 5 or 6 years ago, my wife and I were buying a house in San Francisco. And it was like the same thing. The real estate agent would be like, what's your down payment? And how much money do you have? And are you pre-approved? And it was all like the numeric evaluation piece. Your grades tell me, the reader, if you're shopping in the right area, right? So when I looked at grades, what did I look at? Well, first of all, gentlemen, if you're like every other male in the world, you probably started a little bit slow in high school. So it's sort of like, okay, the focus on the evaluation of the grades is always the trends. The most recent set of grades are the most important set of grades, right? So maybe 9, 10, I'd be like, oh, not important. Whether those 11, 12, 13, those are the grades that are super important to the admissions officer. They're looking for that, right? Next, I'm also evaluating your grades within the context perhaps of what you think you might be studying. So my engineer that has a bad math grade worries me. My history future lawyer that has a poor chemistry grade worries me less. So I'm kind of reading things contextually along those lines. In terms of rigor, I know that there's a couple of curriculums floating around Australia, and I think that goes into kind of like, well, I don't know, are you doing the full IB? Are you doing the local curriculum? Are you doing the Cambridges? I'm like evaluating rigor in terms of how my university has kind of pegged that particular curriculum. At the same time, I'm always evaluating a student within the context of their country, within the context of their school. That's always my evaluation point. I can't sit there and compare a student in Auckland with a student in Silicon Valley when the curriculums are totally different. So I'm evaluating contextually with that piece of the puzzle. All right, grades. Test scores, I look at SAT or ACT. I encourage students to sign up and take them. They're optional now, but I feel like take them. I think that the trend right now is colleges want to see that extra bit of information. A student in the back was like, what if I self-study for an AP exam and put that in on top of my New Zealand curriculum? I'm like, yeah, that goes to that numeric piece of the evaluation. And it tells me, oh, this student that's another piece of numeric evidence where I'm like trying to figure out where the student is at numerically. Okay. Any questions so far on that first step? All right, yes, nice and loud.
You said SAT, what was the next?
Or ACT. It's the same, two different tests. Colleges could care less which one you take, SAT or the ACT. Okay, anything else? Okay, what's your name? What's your name?
Georgie.
Georgie? All right, Georgie. A good experienced admissions officer, how long will it take them to get through that part of the application? The first hurdle. Well, could we be more specific?
I don't know, like 10 minutes?
10 minutes, okay. Do you have an MIT shirt on?
Yeah.
Are you like making a statement to the audience right now? Are you trying to intimidate us? It's like, you should say like MIT, my safety school. All right, how long? How long to get through that part of the process? 5 minutes, 10 minutes to 5. He was just doing that just to be like a contrarian, okay? 10, 5, okay. What about you, sir, my athlete?
Maybe like 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. He's, who would have thought? He's the closest to it. I would say a good experienced admissions officer, I'd go 3 to 5 minutes at the most. Georgie, I've only got 12 minutes to get through your whole application. So it's like maybe 15 at the most. So yeah, 3 to 5 minutes for a numeric evaluation. Okay, I know there's always questions of like, well, will they understand the New Zealand curriculum or things like that? The admissions officer that is assigned your country, part of his or her job is to become an expert on the curriculum and kind of know what's going on. And dare I say it, maybe even know your school. Be like, oh, I know this school. I've got what's going on. If there are questions, Georgia, you literally email the school or you call them up if possible. You're like, hey, I don't get this. What's going on? I'm trying to figure out the curriculum. 3 to 5 minutes for sure. I'm gonna stay with you. What's your name? Angus. All right, Angus. Harder question. I'm dean of admissions at Stanford or Harvard or Northwestern or one of those elite schools. What percentage of the students survive hurdle 1? What do you think, Angus?
I'd say like 5%.
5%. Wow, you're in a dark place. You're like, wow, that was like the most, of this entire week of travel, Angus, you win the pessimist, my colleagues are morons award. All right, Angus is at 5%. Does anybody feel a little more optimistic about their peers? Yes, sir, my hockey player, nice and loud. 80% are gonna survive. What about over here? MIT, I'm giving up on you. How about over there, you with the green colored shirt right there, white, green, what do you think? 50, okay, we're getting some different things. All right, the reality is, to be honest with you, maybe because I'm a nice guy, maybe because I'm not in your dark place, Angus. I think about 80% of the kids, I thought numerically, were strong enough to justify I read the application. Now, the messaging that I should send to the students here, and what I'm hoping you're hearing is this. I didn't expect perfection. I think the great myth out there is like, it has to be just these amazing, ridiculous marks, or else you're in big trouble. I read the transcript contextually. I absolutely knew that males start high school a bit slow, so I would kind of give you a kind of a slow start a little bit. That was so common that at Stanford we had a term for it. It was like, it's just like that was common. I was cognizant of the specialist. I'm not going to deny my future brilliant engineer just because they didn't do well in Spanish. Does that make any sense? That makes no sense to me. Between me and you guys, I'll tell you right now, Andy with DoorDash, the founder of DoorDash, that sends me pictures of his mansions and girlfriends and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, not brilliant. Brilliant with computer science, brilliant with his idea I should have just brought his transcript and just embarrassed him. Because he sends me emails that's like, hey, Mr. Walsh, here's my mansion. Are you still driving a used Fiat? I'm like, yes, Andy. Not doing well here on my end. But you don't have to be as brilliant as you think to survive that first hurdle. And the transcripts are read contextually. And the transcripts do tell a story. The 20% that I did kind of push to the deny, the 25% that I pushed to the deny pool, oftentimes it wasn't like I thought, oh, the kid's not smart. But I thought to myself, boy, bringing that student into this university and how fast things move might be kind of a disservice. You just kind of in over your head a bit, that's for sure. Which then leaves us with the second hurdle, the vitality hurdle, which is kind of the basic question with vitality is just kind of, and this is where the whole American model seems kind of weird, but it's like, what makes you interesting? Are you likable? MIT, remember that. Are you likable? Are you somebody that's going to contribute to my community? Like, what are you going to bring into my community that's like really cool? Now, the thing of it is that before I worked at Stanford, I was a lawyer. Bad one, very bad, most clients in jail. My claim to fame is that I went to law school with Kamala Harris. And between you and me, I did ask her out. She said she'd get back to me, which I've learned is not a good sign. When you girls say that, it's like been 30, 40 years, no getting back to me. But she has free time now, maybe. I'll hear from her. But anyway, this was the first time I felt like I really put my law degree to use. It was like design or develop a second hurdle. Now, what's your name, sir? Sean? Okay, Sean. Now, to go back a little bit, I just mentioned earlier that Stanford's got $6.5 million put aside for research. Now, we didn't put that pile of money there to sit and do nothing. We've got seminars, we've got overseas study options. Looking at that, what is our second hurdle going to be about? What are we looking for in our students?
Who would take advantage of that?
Right, okay, which is, go with it, keep going. What type of person would that be? Give me some personality types. Creative? Okay, Sean wants someone creative. What do you want?
Leadership.
Leaders? Creative leaders. Okay. What about you? Ambitious. Very Silicon Valley. Good, 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 good. All right, how about you, sir? Arms are crossed, kind of angry body language. What have you got? Determined. Okay. I'll try again. MIT, what do you got?
Courageous.
What? Great. Listen, they're not going to war. Have you ever seen Stanford's campus? It's like gorgeous. It's like, my God, the weather's always perfect. Like, there's no crime at all. The food's great. Like, we're looking for, what is this, a Marines ad? We're looking for a few courageous men to come to Stanford. I don't think that's what we were looking for. But I think that when it comes to this second hurdle, you're looking for the type of student that would take advantage of the rides. Dare I say it, a great metaphor when you're looking at American universities is this. They're amusement parks. Every amusement park is the same. They've all got classes or whatever, but they're all different. They've all got their ride. Stanford Ride is absolutely entrepreneurial kids, entrepreneurial kids, entrepreneurial kids, out-of-the-box thinkers. That's what they're about. That's what they valued. In fact, at Stanford, the great quote I heard from the Dean of Admissions was, we're not looking to admit memorizers. We're not looking to admit memorizers. We're looking to admit kids that are kind of doing stuff. So he turns to me, the dean says, okay, all right, use your law degree, because I totally faked and lied about my grades. And I was like, okay, I'll use my law degree to come up with and design the second hurdle. So the first line, intellectual vitality, which is what we called the second hurdle, intellectual vitality. It's easier to identify than to define. And if any parent is in this room that has a law degree, you're like, oh God, that's such a BS word. All right, yeah, but that's really like, we're just like, I don't know what intellectual vitality is. I just know it when I see it. I know it when I see it. I'll say this, we did come up with some stuff. Vitality often means the student has assumed responsibility for their own learning. They've put on a talk. They've organized a club. They've assumed responsibility that goes beyond the confines of the curriculum. They're not just sitting there saying, I took this class, I got this good grade, therefore I'm done with it. The class is just the starting point of the learning. They've shown maturity and self-discipline in the fulfillment of a project. Sean, one of my favorite students I ever admitted to Stanford. Do you want to hear a story? He wrote his essay about rebuilding a car engine. And he talked about getting this old Jeep, driving home, taking apart the Jeep, putting the engine back together again, and Sean, the car didn't start. He's like, no, wasn't deterred. Got online, got a book, read up, took the engine apart, put it back together again, Sean, the car still wouldn't start. So in his essay, he said, please let me study engineering at your school so I can get my damn car to start. Admit, like there, like that, took on a project, did some stuff, tried some stuff. Read deeply, create energetically, experiment creatively. I don't know, this is like the real catch-all phrase, like they're just original thinkers. This is Stanford's second hurdle. Now, I would argue that Yale's is different, Harvard's is slightly different. Our second hurdle reflected our values, our location. The bigger point is, I think when you're looking at top American universities, grades aren't going to be enough. In fact, grades are certainly something that are important, but it's the second hurdle that's the big one. Intellectual curiosity, the colleges will actually even ask you essay questions that go to your curiosity. Tufts University in Boston's like, what excited your intellectual curiosity? They're just straightforward. What are you curious about? Stanford, reflect on an idea or an experience that makes you genuinely excited about learning. They're asking about this. They're begging, like, what are you excited about? If we bring you into our amusement park, are you ready for the rides? Or are you a memorizer? University of California, Berkeley, how have you taken advantage of a significant educational opportunity? They're going to be asking you questions to measure the curiosity and the vitality. The questions are there. They're being really, really straightforward. You're looking for vitality. You're looking for lives lived with purpose, passion, and meaning, challenges met and overcome, character, leadership. These are the things that you want in your community. And that's the thing. Now, I think that sometimes the American applications intimidate students because it just seems like a lot. But the minute you go from numeric evaluation, which just give me your grades, to holistic evaluation with that second hurdle, which involves vitality and measuring, you have to have essays, and you have to have letters of recommendation, and you have to sometimes even have an interview. And sometimes you do something online, like you present yourself in some sort of film fashion like Chicago does, right? All of these things are there not to make the process difficult for you, but actually to show like they're really trying to get to know you, the person, beyond just a flat transcript. And if you look at them as like, if you look at these challenges or these hurdles, just being like, oh, that's a pain, you're missing the point. It's actually an opportunity to be something more than a number. And if you look at it that way, then it's like you can start to get your story out there. You can start to tell the admissions officer what you're about. So you're looking for vitality, certainly in the students' activities. And on that thing called the Common Application, there'll be 10 slots where you can put your activities down. And you can list them out, describe them briefly, right? Then after that, there's essays, where you're writing like your personal statement. Let me tell you about my story. You're writing about kind of things that are meaningful to you. You're answering specific questions. Why, like for the University of Chicago, why do you want to come to Chicago? For Stanford, how about this one? Are you ready? Because you're just in the front row. Are you ready? Yeah. All right, here's Stanford's famous supplement question. And everyone can think about how they'd answer this. Like, write a note to your future roommate. Right? Now, what does that have to do with being an engineer? What does that have to do with being a business person or a lawyer? Write a note to your future roommate. That's a big one. That was a super important question we'd ask. How about here, to the Brain Trust? Why are they asking that? What do you think?
Because they want to know what you'll add to campus.
Okay, it goes into like personality type a little bit. So let's say, MIT guys, note to roommate. What's your name?
Aiden.
What?
Aiden.
Aiden's note to roommate is like, hey roommate, let me tell you how great I am. Here are the computer games that I've won. Here are my inventions. Here's the debate championships I've won. Do you want to room with that person? Oh, no, really? Oh my God, someone to cheat off of, I don't know. Like, the question was actually designed by the psych department. The whole idea was like, if the student just writes about themselves, like, we might have issues in terms of just an ego. It's a note to your future roommate. We were looking for kids that actually tried to include their future roommate in the conversation. Tell me about yourself. What are you about? Just that simple thing of acknowledging that roommate and bringing them into the note was a plus point at Stanford. You have all these questions where they're measuring kind of like, what do we get with this student? And I think when we did a little role play yesterday, I was always like back to that, what do we get if we admit this student? So you've got these essays, you've got the Common App personal statement, and that's the long 500 to 600 word essay. The thing about that is it's not a job interview. It's actually a lunch table conversation. It's a chance to share your story. It's a chance to share something interesting about you, a habit, a life experience, something that shaped you, where you're like, you need to know this about me. So again and again, the theme in the American model is it's more than numbers in the evaluation process. Yes, numbers are there, that's the first hurdle, but we're looking for more than just numbers. Here's a case study for a King's College student, right? Okay, got into the University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League school, life sciences and management program. Super, no problem here with the numbers, right? You look at this, it takes you a couple of minutes to be like, okay, class rank 2 of 268, SAT 1530, it's all looking really good to me. New Zealand International Biology Olympiad bronze medal, clearly here, the hurdle he survived it. I'm going to read this application. The numeric piece is just fine. The second hurdle, though, is where there's some really interesting things that I'm sure Penn was like, oh, I like what we're getting here. A student that wrote and published a dystopian sci-fi book exploring bioethical and gender dynamics, I can't even say that, of modern and future society in a hyper-capitalized post-CRISPR world. I don't know if I'd read it, but I'm impressed that, that the student did that. I like that. Worked under the guidance of Alicia Stein from Yale, MCDB, nominated for New Zealand's Prime Minister Future Scientist Prize. It's like, okay, clearly there's a lot of curiosity going on here. Clearly there's an exploration. I can see why Penn was like, we're all about this student. The hurdle 1 survived, hurdle 2 survived, most definitely. All right, now, if hurdle 1 is, let's say, 80% survive, the second hurdle is vitality. How many are still standing? Let's go over here to you. What do you think? As you get down to after hurdle 2, and now I'm about 10 minutes into the read, what percentage are still alive?
30?
30%?
20%?
20%, yeah, because parents are kind of, no, this is a big hurdle. This is a hard one, right? Okay, it's dropping down, dropping down. Let's go over here to this student. What do you think?
Like 35.
35%. I'll go to this student.
30.
30%?
Yeah, 30%.
Okay, all right, 30, you're kind of like, okay, I think we're all recognizing over here that that's a tough hurdle. As students, as you grow into adulthood, sometimes you're gonna find just leading an interesting life is more challenging than actually making money. Just leading a life where you're like, that's interesting, you're doing some cool stuff. It's a hard hurdle, even as an adult, to survive. I would say, depending on the territory, if I'm reading for Florida, maybe 2% survive, Oklahoma 1%. But I had some pretty bright kids. I was in that New England boarding school area, kind of kids like this school. I'd go with that 20, 25% maybe are still alive, right, in the process. Now, here's the thing. What is Stanford's admit rate?
Huh?
What? It's close. It is exactly what percentage of students are admitted to Stanford?
7.
7%. So we're at 25. You're saying we got to go from 25 to 7%? Okay. What do you think? What percentage?
4 or 5?
Yeah, on a good day, yeah. Okay. Yeah, we've still got to go from 25% still alive to probably down to, let's go with 4% or 5% still alive. So the third hurdle. But before I go to the third hurdle, let me pause and ask if there's any questions about the second hurdle, vitality. And I do assure you that vitality is contextual, meaning the vitality that my kids show in Silicon Valley is going to be different perhaps from the vitality that's shown by students in New Zealand. But any questions about the second hurdle? Yes, nice and loud, please.
You mentioned that schools like Harvard or Yale might think quite differently
Yeah.
about why you write that essay. So what are the sorts of things that those other schools do?
Well, some of it is a little, I don't think that they're wildly different. I think Harvard and Princeton, these schools are always looking for kind of kids that are not memorizers. I think Stanford's second hurdle, which we worked on, I just think it's so reflective of the area. How we're gosh, we really, that sort of entrepreneurial feel. I don't know if that is quite as stressed in, say, a Yale evaluation model or something like that. Now, my gosh, a really cool talk would be just to be and now we'll spend the next hour going through the second hurdle of every school that I've got. But all I have really is Stanford. And all I have is the realization from talking to my colleagues on that end that, okay, there's some differences here in terms of what's valued. And I think the main takeaway for all the students and parents would be there is that second hurdle. And you can't just rely on grades. And that, in my opinion, sometimes those second hurdles could be maybe a bit more I'm thinking like some of those New England schools just might be more traditional academic stuff. Have you entered into this debate competition? What have you won? Or just the writing piece or writing competitions or history research, things like that. Things that my Silicon Valley kids are not doing. Now, ironically, my kids in Silicon Valley have a much higher admit rate at MIT and at Stanford than they do at Yale. I mean, it's not even close. I feel like once in a blue moon, we get a Yale admit. Because I feel like my kids are dancing a dance that Yale's second hurdle is like, what are they doing? I don't, what do you mean you're starting? They're like me, like, what, you're starting a food company with your phone? Denied. So it's sort of like, like that's, so there's that, so it varies a little bit, that's for sure. You can, though, kind of research. You can look at those questions that the universities ask, and I think those are all great indicators of what the university is valuing with their kind of individual questions, like what they're looking for. That's for sure. Other questions on the vitality piece. Okay, before I move on to the third hurdle, I want to call in some students and I want to hear how interesting they are. All right, so who's been doing some interesting things? I'll stay up with this group because they're right by me. Tell me, what makes you interesting? It's got to be something. Don't say nothing.
I like tech.
What?
I'm interested in like tech stuff, but I wouldn't, just like.
You haven't done the deep
It's-
dive
it's-
yet? Have you started a tech company or anything like that?
A little bit.
Okay.
He has.
All right, let's go to the guys back here. They're very confident, and they can tell they want me to call on them. So what about you, sir? What, right now, as you look at what year are you in high school?
Year 13.
All right, so you're kind of wrapping it up, right? So you're like, at this point, you're like, okay, mom and dad, here's why it was all worth it. Here's how I've done a deep dive. Go.
I started a company.
Oh my God, did it go bankrupt?
Not yet.
Not yet, not close to it, okay. In other words, you've defrauded your investors. That's another way to put it, yeah? What did your company sell?
Nothing.
Good. My God, you are American. All right. So good. Why didn't I call on him early? You've got to point out the fun people to call on. You remind me of a student that I worked with who started a scrunchie company. And scrunchies are what women put in their hair when they play volleyball to hold their hair up. I've learned this. The crap I've learned working in high schools is sort of insane, but I know what a scrunchie is. And this student, in very typical Silicon Valley fashion, was like, I want to disrupt the scrunchie industry. Why? Every one of my kids have to disrupt everything. Why can't you say I have an idea? No, everything has to be a disruption. My wife's whole thing with her company is like, I'm disrupting the food industry. I'm like, how about just getting a paycheck? But anyway, she wanted to disrupt the scrunchie industry, so she came up with new scrunchies, different designs, different color combinations, created a website, sent out the website to different volleyball coaches of clubs and schools, thinking like you'd want to have your school colors. Are your school colors like maroon and brown and white? What are your colors? Maroon. Oh, that's a complicated scrunchie. All right, so you've got like, so she did this whole scrunchie business, super excited, puts up the website, and what happened?
No idea.
Well, I think that he modeled the behavior. What happened to his company?
Nothing.
Yes, nothing. She sold like one to her aunt who I'm positive was too old to be playing volleyball. So anyway, but in her college essay, the first line of her essay was, I first declared bankruptcy at the age of 16. But just still to this day, like the best opening essay line ever. Who wouldn't want to read that essay, right? Now, the student gets admitted to a ton of schools, including the University of Chicago, and I've got a connection there or whatever, and we have our retreat every summer. It's another aside, Chicago always does their retreats in Napa. They never actually host anything in Chicago. Something tells me that they like the wine country. Anyway, I'm at the Napa wine retreat with the University of Chicago, and I see the dean, I'm like, so what, you admitted this student? And like, I was like, her business idea was a disaster. And he gave it a good laugh. He's like, oh yeah, the bankrupt girl, like the bankrupt girl. But he said something that stuck with me. He said, show me a 16-year-old bankrupt kid. I'll show you a 26-year-old millionaire. And his point there was, he could care less. Chicago, I'll tell you right now, do you want to go to Chicago? I'll put in a call.
Yeah.
Because you're what they're looking for. You're a failure. You sold nothing. Like you just hit the home run with that one, right? But it's like, he was like, the point there was like, yeah, the guys that I worked with started DoorDash and make jokes about it, and they're all bazillionaires, whatever, but it's like, it's not actually about success. I think what the college's reward is effort, thinking out of the box, trying something, being interesting. So, good for you for your business that sells nothing. And, so how you've managed to last this long, I think is a whole essay. How you survived 1 year selling nothing with no product is pretty impressive. I think that could go into the MBA case studies. So that second hurdle, yeah. So any other kind of questions on the second hurdle? We've got anybody doing something like super cool and interesting? The best hockey player in the country? Anybody that's doing anything to save the environment? I've got a lot of kids involved in environmental stuff. I worked with a student one time who QR coded all the trees on her campus. The idea was you become more environmentally conscious when you know the trees. So it'd be like, here's the name of a tree, and then here's like what's going on with it. She was like, that's how we'll save the environment. We'll just personalize it. I thought it was kind of cool. She got into Princeton. Like just that idea of like QR coding her trees. This vitality part could involve athletics, like someone who's done a deep dive and is really good at a particular sport, or being a really good debater. Stuff like that could be like evidence of that vitality for sure, where I'm like, this is interesting. But more often than not, it's just the student that looked around at their community, came up with an idea, and kind of went for it and tried something. We're at about, let's say, 20 to 25%, again, depending on what territory we're talking about. So we still have to bring it down. And this brings us then to the third and final hurdle that you have to survive if you're going to be a competitive applicant in the United States. And I call this hurdle institutional needs. I mean, you might have great grades, you might have tremendous vitality, but you're not there yet. You still have to fit what my university is looking for. Every year before we went into the kind of committee to read applications, the deans, the assistant deans would meet with the president of Stanford. And he'd be like, okay, here's what we've got going on. Here's what we're looking for. Here's what we're trying to create, And it could be as simple as our hockey team's horrible. Go out there and recruit some more hockey players. Or it could be something, like our basketball team needs help. It could be, the coaches are complaining, admit those people, right? It could be any kind of thing that goes into institutional needs. Now, for general purposes, I'm going to cover a few that I think are pretty big. The first one for international students could be just financial aid. There are need-blind institutions out there, there's 9 of them, that will kind of sit there and say, we don't care, we don't take into account your financial status when applying, right? But for many universities, even a university as rich as Stanford, there were some limits placed on financial aid for international, not domestic, but international students. So great grades, tremendous vitality, you have financial need, I'm out of money. Could be a reason why I'm like, I just think we have to deny the student. And that's a reality, and that's something to kind of keep in mind. But not every school, and quite frankly, you only find out your financial aid package after you're admitted. So I'm sort of like, you kind of have to apply, go through the process, and then see what the universities have come up with in terms of those packages. So institutional needs could include financial aid. The second one, I think this plays to the advantage of everyone in this room. Every university, big or small, Santa Clara or Stanford, Chicago or DePaul, they want a robust and geographically diverse student population because it's plain and simple, good for business. Demographics in the United States, 18, 17-year-olds going to college, dropping like a rock. These colleges are not going to survive unless they get kids from different countries. That's the first thing. So geographic diversity is good, and most universities I talk to want more international students. Now, but it's not as simple as that. Some countries have literally flooded the United States with applications. India sent the most applications to the United States of any country last year, in the last cycle that just ended. So if you're an admissions officer and your goal is to create geographic diversity on campus, and you've got literally a bunch of applications from India, it actually becomes the point where it's actually not diversity anymore. It's actually a kind of a heavily represented population. India, China, South Korea are 3 that jump out to me. Of like, these are oftentimes very heavily represented international student populations, and they're very predominant in the application pool. I can tell you one country that I've never in my life heard anybody complain about, and that's New Zealand. I have never been at a conference where someone's like, oh, those damn New Zealanders, they just keep applying and applying. There's so many, they just keep coming. It's a wave after wave of New Zealanders. Like, it doesn't happen. I would argue that for every one of you in this room, every student, when your application lands on the desk of NYU or Northwestern or Chicago or something, it's like, trust me, they're not tired of your application yet. They're actually probably like, oh my God, there's only 3 of these this last year, or something like that. You actually, I think everyone in this room represents a degree of geographic diversity. And remember, even if you have a passport that's not Kiwi, you're going to be evaluated in New Zealand if that's where you're studying. So you do represent geographic diversity, and this was a big thing. Now, when I worked at Stanford, Stanford's in Silicon Valley, surrounded by a bunch of top high schools. Dare I say it, Stanford could survive just by admitting kids from those high schools. No way were we going to do that. Your job is to get kids from all over the world, every country possible. So geographic diversity could very much be another institutional need, and one that absolutely plays to your favor. The third one, for some of you, is good news, some of you is bad news. Now, what's your name?
Israel?
Israel, good name. All right, Israel. How's school going?
Good?
Yeah? Co-ed school? You go to this school, right? It's co-ed, right? Boys and girls, right? Who does better in the classroom, guys or the gals?
Couldn't tell you.
Couldn't tell? No, it's pretty similar? Let's go over to our male expert on this side. All right, how are we doing over here? Our man that sold nothing and is doing well, but just about to go bankrupt, tries to, looking, I just caught him on his phone looking at real estate in Costa Rica where there's no policies. How are you doing in school?
Yeah, fine, yeah.
You crushed it?
Nah.
No, okay, I like that honesty. There we go, all right. All right, what do you think? Who's doing better, males or females?
Maybe females?
Maybe, a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let's go to the ladies. All right, how's it going? What are we thinking?
Females.
Females are definitely doing better. No, you're like really confident with that one. Okay, all right, all right. Now, I don't really know what's going on at this school or in New Zealand in general, but I can tell you this. If you look at global trends, and I don't think I'm surprising anybody here, women are doing much better than men in high school. I mean, it's kind of, in some parts of the United States, it's almost not even close. You know, there's a point where I was talking to a dean of admission that was just like, I'll admit the kid as long as he doesn't have a police record. That was where you're kind of at. You know, just like give me someone that hasn't been arrested. You know, things are a little bit tough in parts of the US. But gender gaps can also be an institutional need. Guys, what a great time to study in the United States. Some of these colleges are 70% female. You go there and you don't get a date. Oh, it's a long, hard look in the mirror, you know? Now, so it's like you got, if no, I gave a talk one time in India and all of a sudden all these kids were like, I'm going to the United States. That is where the women are. But you do have gender gap issues that are playing a role in admissions decisions at many universities because they're trying to keep it 50-50, 55-45. And so, gosh, that could be something that plays a role for sure. Another thing that could impact my ability to admit you might be program of study. Now, remember earlier I said in the United States there's a freedom to explore. Still, most colleges will be like, well, give me an idea what you're thinking about, because I've got these different colleges to fill. For the longest time, well, really starting around 2005 or so, computer science, computer engineering just took off, making it so that you'd be reading, and 8 out of every 10 applications would be something computer science, computer engineering related. This screenshot's actually from University of Washington in Seattle, which is a large public right by Microsoft. And you could just see where it was like that particular program became really competitive, in part because so many kids applied into that program. That could impact my ability to admit you. This is a student that I worked with that was basically a perfect student, thinking that he was going to go off to Caltech, Cal Berkeley, or Stanford. Poor him, but he ended up at UC Santa Barbara. I thought it was a good turnout, but he got denied at a lot of schools he thought he'd get admitted to. He did nothing wrong. I just was like, I think that the major you're applying to is so popular right now that it's impacting the dean's ability to admit you. Now, the cycle that just ended, the one that kind of we're wrapping up right now, computer science was no longer the most popular competitive major. It's been replaced. I guess the word on the street is that AI is going to make programmers relatively irrelevant in the future. So a lot of my kids are like, no, don't study that. What do you think is the most popular major right now or program in the United States if you're doing an undergraduate study? What's the super popular one?
Science.
Science, like a pre-med path, maybe? Like biology and just straight science? Commerce, business, finance, yeah. It's business finance. That by far became the super competitive path to go down, I think, at all those top schools, NYU Stern, Penn Wharton, et cetera. It's like, whoa, those got a lot harder. So, the really smart student out there is already thinking, well, what I'll do is I'll apply to Penn, but not commerce. And once I get into Penn, I'll sort of make my way in and start taking business classes that way. I had a student that did that, studied history, had no interest in history. She started to actually kind of like history, but there she is going to Penn, and she's like, well, once you're at Penn, you're in that ecosystem, and she got a job on Wall Street. It was like, she was like, you're there. Everyone just hires you, So program of study can absolutely impact things. Now, the last thing, and it's important for you to understand this part, college admissions is a lot like, being a dean of admissions is a lot like being a maitre d' at a restaurant or owning a restaurant, right? At the end of the day, well, let's go over here to our group. Oh, no, I called on you guys a lot. Who could I go back down here? I haven't called on you yet. What would cause a restaurant to go bankrupt?
No one goes to the restaurant?
Yeah, do you agree? You're our business expert.
Yeah. It's
Yeah. He's like, I own 3 restaurants. No one's ever ate there. They're probably closing soon. Yeah, it's like no one eats there, right? Or the seats are empty. I realized working in admissions that my job was literally just fill the dorm beds. If there were 500 dorm beds, 250 rooms, 2 beds each, my job at the end of the day really was, quite frankly, make sure that those beds are filled. Now, while I was working at Santa Clara University as director of admissions, one year we were 3 students short. And I truly thought, no big deal. 3 students is no big deal, right? Until Father Locatelli, a priest, mind you, came into my office, and he's like, what's going on? I was like, well, we're 3 kids short, but I'm not too worried about it. And he looked at me, and he's like, sit down. I was like, it's Father Locatelli, you got to sit down, right? He's like, okay, gets out his whiteboard, gets out a little scratchy. He's like, okay, 3 kids, 4 years of tuition, food plans, books, blah, blah, blah. He's doing all this math. He's like, okay, so 3 kids short means that you've just shorted Santa Clara University over $1 million. And I was like, so he's like, what are you going to do? And I was like, well, Father, I'm going to go get 3 more kids. And he was like, yeah, damn right you will. We got to get those kids. You've got to fill the restaurant, right? Now, sticking with you, what's the best tool that restaurant owners have to make sure their restaurant gets filled besides good food?
Advertising and getting your name out there.
Getting your name out there at marketing, that's a good approach, okay. Another thing that restaurants have come up with, and I don't know if it's big in New Zealand, but it's just like making a reservation, right? Just if you make a reservation, I guarantee you a seat at my restaurant. American universities came up with their own form of reservations when they came up with something called early decision, which is like marriage. Marriage, that's what it is. Early decision is this kind of devious invention that deans came up with, which basically said, you can only apply to my school, but if I admit you, you have to come to my school, right? Why in heaven's name would you give up your freedom to apply a bunch of schools and commit to that school? What are you getting in return?
Your dream school?
Maybe you're compromised, like marriage, maybe you're compromised dream school. All right, okay, it's like, okay. Like you're getting, there's a quid pro quo here. Like in return for you promising to attend, should you be admitted, in return, because the dean wants to keep their job, because the dean wants to get this all over with, because most deans actually don't like their job, and they want to fill that restaurant quickly so they go skiing at Tahoe or something, they're going to give you a much better admissions rate. Early decision, that promise to attend my university, relieves stress. I no longer have to worry about, is this 17-year-old going to come to my school if I admit them? Rather, through early decision, by applying in October before Halloween, turning to that university and saying, I promise to attend if you admit me, well, you're going to get a huge bump in the process. You've made your reservation at the restaurant, and it's like, that's great. Good stuff on the dean's side. Now, keeping with this thought, gentlemen up front, are you guys awake up there? I haven't called on anybody in the upper deck. What's your name? Anthony. Anthony? You're dean of admissions at University of Chicago. Middle of the country, not the sexiest city, but not a bad city. It gets very cold in the winter. There's inflation in the United States. There's some political uncertainty, to say the least. There's war in the Middle East. There's war in Eastern Europe. You want to keep your job. Your kids are living on campus. Your salary's like $300,000. What percentage of the class do you fill early decision? How many seats in that restaurant do you fill? 40%, okay. Let's go over here. What about you, sir? 50%. Now you're like, no, I really want to keep my job. 50%. What about you?
Like 75?
Well, you're kind of getting it. It's like, no, I'm going, particularly if you're Chicago, Cornell, upstate New York, in Ithaca, New York, again, not like, yeah, you're going 60, 65%. 40%, 30%, like you'll get fired. You're not going to get your class. You're going to end up struggling trying to find out. So what you've got with a lot of universities, let's see if we've got it here. What you've got with a lot of universities is literally they're filling up 60%, 61%, 65% of their class in the early decision round. It just makes good business sense. How about this? Stanford's early decision admit rate. It's a trick question. What do you think it is? How about this? Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they don't offer early decision because they know you're going to come if they admit you. So they just offer single choice early action, which really means you can only apply to us. This is a little bit like what Kamala Harris did to me. You can only apply to my university. If we admit you, you don't have to come. There's no statistical bump. There's no reservation. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Caltech run that single choice early action program because they know if they admit you, you're going to come. They're not worried about it. Over here, what schools offer early decision? Cornell, upstate New York, pretty cold. Chicago, very cold. Duke, North Carolina, not cold at all. Good basketball, early decision. Brown, Columbia. Some great schools offer ED, but not all of them offer it. So a good, smart admissions dean will run that sort of program, and that could be another thing on that third hurdle of like, do I admit you or not? That institutional need of like, at the end of the day, part of my job is just to fill the class. All right, there are more early programs than ever before. University of Chicago is actually an ED0, which is like you apply so early in the process. They came up with it this year, again, to try and get kids to commit to their school. So here you are. The first hurdle grades, I'm like, it's actually do your best. It's maybe a slightly lower hurdle than you think. The second hurdle, vitality, oof, that's the hard hurdle. That thing of being interesting, writing interesting essays, that's the hard hurdle. I'm looking at your essays, I'm looking at your extracurriculars, I'm looking at your letters of rec. The third hurdle is really strategy, and this is probably 90% of the work I do with students in California is a lot of kind of second and third hurdle stuff. The strategy of like, do we apply early or not? What makes the most sense? From King's to the World, here are some students that went from King's to Stanford, Columbia, and Penn. The Huntsman's program at Penn is super competitive. Stanford and Princeton admit, NYU admit. So clearly there is, what that really tells me is that if you've got this school on your transcript, the readers at top universities know your school. It's not like they're like, what, where am I, what school is this? Like, you guys are a known quantity out there, which is really, really good and really helpful. So overall, before I go to Q&A, I'd be like, when you're thinking about the American process, up here, just where do your numbers match up? What real estate can you afford? Second hurdle, what can you write about? What can you tell me, the admissions officer, that'll get me excited about having you on my campus? Third hurdle, institutional needs. Do I need more males or females? Do I need more kids from New Zealand? Yeah, probably. Do I need more of this major or that major? Like, those are the factors that go into the thought process. How much financial aid money do I have, et cetera? At the end of the day, my job at Stanford involved collecting all of those international applicants and then going to committee. And committee was just this long 2 or 3 or 4 day process where you literally stood up there like a lawyer and you presented to the audience of professors and other admissions officers to determine if the student is admitted or not. So the way I looked at it, when I was reading an application, if the student survived those 3 hurdles, I was definitely taking them to committee and sort of going from there. I think that right there is about more information I ever got when I started at Stanford, but that's how I've broken it down. And maybe I'll just kind of go to Q&A at this point. So helpful, I hope, and I thank you very much. So questions on any of the hurdles that people want to jump out with? I know it's warm in here, but anything you're not sure of? Yeah, nice and loud, sir.
So does this apply to like UK schools as well?
Okay, the UK schools to me are very different because the essay you're writing for the UK schools are very much like, why do I want to read a specific subject, be it history or chemistry or something like that. I think that their read style is a little bit less holistic, meaning that second hurdle is a little bit different, I think. I think the American model is a bit more broad and open, I would say. My students that have gotten into schools like Oxford and Cambridge are often very angular, very focused in on something and quite good at it, whether that be Latin or whether it be chemistry or something like that. I've had some really good generalists get into top American schools just by making interesting choices.
When you're writing your essays,
Yeah.
do you have to write a different essay for all schools, or is it?
Great question. So that thing called the Common Application, it does have one essay. That essay goes off to all the schools you're applying to. That's that lunch table conversation essay. If you're stapling on supplement questions like Stanford does or whatever, the note to roommate, that's a unique answer across the board. And by the way, because I think you did ask about athletics, how athletics would work would be, quite frankly, not me, the admissions officer, but rather the coach saying, I've watched this kid play, I've talked to the coaches in New Zealand, I want this student on my team. And so I would get a note, like, the coach of the basketball team, we have 3 spots, here are 5 kids I'm super interested in, they're applying, in order of importance to me. So if you are thinking about sports in the United States, the key is actually not the admissions officer, but rather getting that connection with the coach where the coach advocates for you in the admissions office. If that coach is advocating, then really you just have one hurdle to survive, which is numeric. Just I have to make sure that your numbers are fine and not representing a potential problem on my campus. Yeah. Yes?
What would you say acceptable grades would be?
Yeah, I mean, it can really, truly vary. I mean, again, I'm going back to like, let's say you're an engineering major. Well, my acceptable grades, like I want to see really good math grades. I want to see really good physics grades. I'm maybe less concerned with French. Now, vice versa, someone who's a future business person, perhaps, I want good math. Maybe a little bit less concerned with how you did in English class or something like that. So it's very contextual. That's why I think sometimes when I travel around, students and parents want like this, what's the key GPA? What's the GPA I have to have? I'd be like, I really feel like I can't say that. I would need a lot more context about the journey. And I'm also looking at 4 years worth of grades. So again, I joke with guys, but it's like, my first year of high school, I vaguely remember, like just hard year. So for a lot of guys, I would be like, well, let's throw out that first year. Let's look at kind of where they're at more recently. So it's really contextual in that way. Major and story and rigor and things like that. And also even the school. I mean, some schools just have a really good, strong academic reputation where you're almost like, I don't care what their grades are. I'd like to admit some kids from that campus onto my school. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Question. Yes, up top, yes.
When is the early decision? At what stage do you have made the early decision?
Yeah.
Is there a date for that?
Yeah, sure. So the American application model is very much an application model that the dates are lined up in the fall. So your early applications go out before Halloween, before October 31st, and you find out before Christmas, December 20th. Your regular decision applications generally go out before or right around January 1st. So I always tell my students Halloween, Christmas, Halloween, Christmas. That's like, those are the 2 big dates and kind of going there. I do want to take a moment just to kind of talk, because I'm a Californian, about a large public school model, which would be the UC system. UCLA, Cal Berkeley, things like that. They do not offer an early program at all because they're taxpayer funded. And oftentimes some of these larger school systems have more space for international students. And they're great programs that are there. And those applications go off in November. But that's also like, most kids that I work with in California have a list that's balanced with both private and public. In part, that's because I'm coming from California, and the UC system with UCLA, UC San Diego, UC Santa Barbara, UC Berkeley, these are top schools. So for my kids and parents, they're very happy with those schools as far as places to go. Mm-hmm. Questions? Any other questions? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just a question regarding geographic diversity.
Yeah.
Do they just look at your citizenship, or do they go down to the path of ethnic group, country of birth?
No, definitely can't go down the path of ethnic group. That would be illegal. They definitely going to focus on where you're studying. The first step would be just like, are you living in New Zealand and studying at a high school in New Zealand? Right? Now, if you're at New Zealand, studying in New Zealand, but you've got a passport from a different country, it's noted, but still the idea is like we're getting that flavor of New Zealand in the evaluation process. And so, yes, nice and loud.
Why would you want to take SAT tests and like Cambridge, for example? Like, why would you want to take 2 tests for the numbers?
I think that with the SAT exam or that standardized exam, in the United States, there aren't Cambridge exams. So most kids are ready for that SAT. I'd remind you that it is actually not compulsory, that most colleges still say it's optional. And my advice on the SAT was like, I would take it. If you do well, submit it. If you don't do well, don't submit it. But I would still take it to have it as another piece of numeric evidence in the evaluation process. Yeah?
Would you say NCEA is like an okay thing that people...
So this is where I'm like, I didn't grow up in New Zealand. I don't think I'm an expert on what's going on here. I think over the last 4 days, I've heard a lot about the different curriculums here, and some schools have NCEA with IB or this or that. If I'm a reader at the side, I'm going to take kind of whatever transcript that you kind of give to me and evaluate. If a high school offers multiple different options, my job then is to figure out, well, is one option harder than the other? Is there a rigor difference? I might get that information just by doing research online or by talking to the high school itself. So So I wouldn't sit there and say, gosh, back in the United States, they make fun of the NCAA transcripts at all. I just think that right now you've got something that's different in the United States. You have a lot of curriculums floating around in New Zealand, and I think that the readers would work to try and understand the different rigor attached to the curriculums. To the students, I generally would say, embrace the curricular choices that challenge you, but also maybe offer you the best chance for success. Because it does nobody any, it's like me trying to run a marathon. It does nobody any good to try something, it's like, it's not gonna happen. So it's like, but try and pick those curriculums where you feel like you can really shine and do your best, on that numeric side. Yes, sir, and then I'll go to the upper deck. Yes, sir, nice and loud.
Can you please give us the example of a specific student that would stand out in the second group?
Oh gosh, I have so many. I told you the story about the girl with the scrunchies, the guy that rebuilt his car engine, the girl that did the QR codes on her tree, the trees on the vitality side. This year, I worked with a student who got into MIT, and he led the Adopt a Park program in San Jose. Some parks had fallen into disrepair post-COVID, and he had actually adopted parks and assigned them to different high schools. He kind of led the whole program from San Jose. I thought that was pretty cool. I had a student that started a math tutoring program called One in Math that won an award in the Bay Area. That was pretty cool. For sure, showing vitality there. I had a student that got his pilot's license. He wants to study aeronautic engineering. I thought that was pretty cool and showing a lot of vitality. So there's all these kind of cool stories like that are out there, I think, for sure. Yeah. Deb, up there? Yes, sir.
I have two questions.
Yes, please.
Unrelated to one another. The first one is you talked about with Stanford you don't declare. Until later.
On the application you list, here's some majors I'm interested in, but you're not held to that.
Okay, that answers the question, which I was trying to figure out when you said, student is doing engineering, but if you're not declaring.
So to really quickly, I've always got some big engineering math kid in my group, right? Because I'm in Silicon Valley. And they're like, I know what I'll do with Stanford. I'm going to declare Latin as my major. And I'm like, okay, brilliant. Let's look at your transcript at how much Latin you've taken. It's like, no, you've taken none. So all of a sudden it's like, despite my 4 years of deep diving into computer science and into mathematics, I now have decided I want to study Latin. The readers will kind of see through that a bit. But if the transcript is more robust in terms of different courses or whatever, then you have a bit more freedom to say something like that.
Yeah, if you have a broad,
humanities as well as some... Exactly, yeah. At Stanford, we actually broke student groups down. We broke applicant groups down into angular students, which are kids that are absolutely focused on what they want to do. And then the other group we called fuzzies. It's like, I don't know what they're going to do, they're smart. We just call them fuzzies. And to this day, people are like, oh, that's a fuzzy. They're it's sort of a phrase that's been embraced, around Silicon Valley. But fuzzies versus angular for students for sure. Yeah.
And then the other question was just around SAT sort of thresholds.
Yeah.
How do you think about thresholds?
The way you do the SAT or any standardized testing like that is you don't sit there and say, 1,600 over 1,580 or something like that. Rather, you broke it down into groupings, right? So 1,600, a perfect score, down to, let's say, 1,540 maybe, or 1,520. That's grouping number one. In fact, I think the sample up there was a 1,520. That's grouping number one. All right, the next grouping is 1,519 to 1,449 or 1,460 or something like that. You just break it down into groupings. 6 groupings, top 3 groupings are generally where your admits landed. That's how it works as far as that goes, yeah. Yes, sir, in the back. Nice and loud, please.
Would you say, if you're going on the path of athletics, the vitality part of getting into these top universities, would you say that that's less important considering the coach is going to be advocating a lot for you on the board?
Right, yeah. So if you are a recruited athlete, you have shown vitality. Your vitality is taking the form of a commitment to soccer or a commitment to volleyball or swimming or something like that. You've shown that vitality. If you're a recruited athlete, the general feeling was you're fulfilling an institutional need. We need athletes to keep the sports going. You've shown vitality by doing a deep dive into that sport. So all that I had to do in the admissions office was just to make sure that numerically I wasn't worried. And that was really what it came down to. Yeah. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let's do the parent first because I've called you. Please.
Hi. Does the admission officer identify whether the student's application through by himself or herself or by the consultant?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any way to tell whether AI has been used on essays or what's going on. I don't think there's any. I've heard that Stanford and some other schools have tools to identify perhaps phrases that have been reused or questionable terms. But no, by and large, there's an element here of trust in the process and that students are presenting their own work. I mean, Even my kids in California, though, I must say, like, they'll meet with me to talk about essay topics, to talk about strategy. I mean, I'll be the first to say, wow, that personal statement's horrible, you know, but let's jump on this idea of like the business that sold nothing. And I'll be like, in my mind, I'm like, your essay's written. Like, I'm like, I know exactly where we'd go with it and have fun with it. So I think, though, that the best essays, I'll guide or give ideas to a student, and a really good consultant will guide and give ideas, but I really think the best essays are you know, the student that wrote, I first declared bankruptcy at the age of 18 or 16, I mean, like, I would have never come up with that line. Like, the kid that did the Jeep that didn't start and had to retake, I would have never had the courage to swear at the end of an essay. So I do think there's an element of like, help the students with like, here's what I think is your best story, make sure that story has a revelation, but take ownership of it for sure on that. Yes, sir?
Is it important to be in lots of like extracurricular?
Great, oh, good one. All right, so the question really goes to hurdle number 2, extracurricular engagement. You know, here's what we said at Stanford. Admit the high impact student, not the high energy student. Meaning, don't get so caught up in the kid that's doing a million things. Rather, admit the kid that's maybe doing fewer things, but is showing strong impact. And that goes to, I think, to my DoorDash guys. Andy was, I think he played volleyball and he worked on his company. There wasn't a ton of stuff, but that high impact. And you're always looking for impact. In fact, we were doing a little role play yesterday. It was like, don't just tell me what they did. Tell me what was the impact of what they were doing on the school or the community. And it could be on campus or off campus. I don't, are we running out of time? How are we doing? One more question, okay. Yes, in the back row.
Is there a big difference between the majors you apply for in terms of the admissions possibilities?
Yeah, for some schools that could make or break. That goes into that sort of third hurdle of institutional needs. And there are some schools like, if you're applying to the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton, which is the business program, if you identify, gosh, Wharton is one of the things I'm interested in. Well, this year I had 8 kids apply to Penn, 2 engineering and 6 Wharton kids. All 6 of my Wharton kids were denied. Like, it was brutal. And I'm like, okay, but my 2 engineers were admitted. So that really tells me that program of study was playing a huge role. I also had 4 or 5 women apply to Rice, which is this amazing pre-med program, and 2 guys apply. All 5 women were denied. The 2 guys were admitted, and I talked to Rice, and like, yeah, we've got some gender gap issues. I was like, you know, we're trying to kind of balance things out. So program of study, gender, these things could play a little bit of a role in the decision making at the end of the day. Yeah. I think, though, I'll be here for questions afterwards. I want to thank you all very much. It was very long and hot, but I thank you all for staying with me, and it's such a fun time being here. So thank you so much for your time.